Part 2, Mother India, Chapter 1. As I walked deeper and deeper into the Indian countryside, the feeling that I had finally arrived overwhelmed me. Evening was falling. In my heart, I embraced every leaf in the trees, every star in the sky, and every plant in the fields. Everything was thrillingly new, yet profoundly familiar. As the twilight faded, a deep stillness covered green fields that stretched out into the distant horizon. Birds warbled, and frogs and crickets chirped. I knew that on my own I could never have survived my arduous journey to this point. By the grace of God, I had come home. I walked some time before flagging down a car. The driver greeted me warmly and conveyed me to Firozpur, a town in the Punjab state of North India. After a pleasant discussion, we arrived at the railway station where he offered me passage to Old Delhi. In the course of my entire journey, I had never traveled on a train, always hitchhiking or riding on the backs of trucks, in poor people's buses, once on a camel, and on overcrowded ferries. Now a railway passage was being offered. How could I refuse? Looking forward to a restful trip, I walked along the platform with my new friend. Up and down the platform, vendors wheeled carts filled with full meals, snacks, fruits, biscuits, souvenirs, magazines, medicines, tea, and clothes. Food I had never seen before was being cooked right on the carts. Someone was deep-frying vegetables dipped in a thick yellow batter in a vat of hot oil. On another cart, flat dough was tossed into smoking hot oil, instantly expanding like a balloon. Nearby, a wood fire burned under an iron wok filled with sand. The cook stirred, roasting peanuts. The smell of pungent spices, fried in cooking oils, mixed with the sense of diesel fumes and incense. Hundreds of people conversed noisily as they waited for the next train. Many families picnic along the railway tracks. Porters balanced heavy trunks on the top of their heads with only a small piece of red cloth separating their skulls from the heavy baggage. Beggars pleaded for charity, displaying their deformities. Some were blind or lame. Some had missing arms or legs, burnt faces, or mangled limbs. One man suffering leprosy put his rotting fingers in people's faces, begging. Mothers in rags carried babies whose eyes oozed with pus and were swarmed by flies. Each of these unfortunates moved from person to person. Overhead, the speaker system crackled, non-stop announcements. Underfoot, human spit dotted the platform. In spite of the clamor and hubbub, dozens of people peacefully slept on the ground amid it all. When the announcer blared the arrival of our train, all passengers suddenly rose to their feet. The whistle blew. Black smoke poured from the engine's chimney and steam hissed. As the locomotive approached the platform, hundreds of people suddenly began running full speed along the moving train. My host also ran as fast as he could. "Follow me," he yelled. All at once, when the train slowed to a reasonable speed, everyone began diving in the windows. My friend, while sprinting, tossed his bag in through a window and leaped in behind it. I was running as fast as I could. He screamed at me from inside the train, "Jump now, before it's too late!" Diving into the window of a moving train looked incredibly dangerous, but everyone was doing it. Finally, after a few cars had passed, I took my leap, grabbing onto the ledge of a window, but I was losing my grip. Looking down, I shrieked. The huge steel wheels rolled steadily under the track below me. I felt so frail. Struggling and confused, I somehow pulled myself up and squeezed through the window and onto the moving train. Within seconds, 2 others squeezed in through the same window behind me. Inside the moving train, I looked around to see people diving and crawling in through every window. By the time the train had come to a halt, every compartment was so jam-packed that no one else could possibly squeeze in. There was no question of a seat. On the wall, a sign read, "Maximum 60 passengers." I couldn't count, but there were perhaps 200 people crammed in all around me. There was no possibility of a conductor even attempting to check for tickets. My host had dived into another compartment several cars ahead of mine, and I never saw him again. Everyone rode for free. This was often the system, I later learned, for third-class compartments in the Indian railways. There was a price to pay, but not in rupees. Inside the train, the crowd pushed and shoved, yet everybody appeared surprisingly peaceful. This was, after all, their routine mode of travel. As the train stormed ahead, people were still hanging partially outside, yet they seemed quite composed. Looking up to the ceiling, I saw metal bars used for baggage storage. Instead of bags, dozens of people had crushed themselves on the racks. I spotted an empty space of about 3 feet and climbed up. Somehow, by tightly curling my body, I, too, squeezed in with the rest. From the shelter of a baggage rack, I looked down at the densely packed crowd and felt as if I were riding in luxury. I was thrilled to be in India. That old steam engine hissed and whistled through the night until in the first gray light of the morning, it pulled into the station of Old Delhi. Not knowing where to go, I disembarked and walked aimlessly along the railway platform. Suddenly, somebody called out my name. "Monk, monk!" "I can't believe it's you!" I turned around to find 2 Frenchmen I had met in Switzerland. We had discussed the Tibetan Book of the Dead on the shores of Lake Geneva. After a joyful reunion, they invited me to shower and rest at their place. By rickshaw, we arrived at a low-budget traveler's haven, the New Crown Hotel. I took a shower and then rested on a veranda floor until a long, furry tail wagged against my face and interrupted my sleep. I opened my eyes only to see a brown monkey sitting at my side. His green eyes stared at me from his pink face. I looked back. Never had I imagined that wild monkeys could roam freely in a crowded metropolitan city. 20 or 30 more jumped from rooftop to rooftop, playing or scouting for food. Down below, shopkeepers were just opening, and they used sticks to scare the pests away. My stay with the Frenchmen was brief, since they were leaving for Nepal. Saying goodbye, I left the New Crown Hotel behind and stepped into the street. Excitement filled me. What would unfold next in my spiritual quest? I was just turning 20 and Mother India, my cherished destination, was now spread out before me. Coming out of the hotel, I found myself in Chandni Chowk, a crowded bazaar. The street was lined with endless shops. Music blared, incense burned, and monkeys frolicked. I saw brightly colored saris, turbans, and decorations in all directions. Children played with their cricket bats while cows strolled gracefully by. After spending months in the grave and stoic culture of the Middle East, I found this atmosphere to be a celebration of life. I walked through the crowded street, observing and absorbing everything I could. Suddenly, a man blocked my path, greeting me with a barrage of questions. "What is your name? From what country have you come? What are your educational qualifications? What is your purpose for coming to India? How do you like my country?" We walked together as he listened to my answers. "Would you like a refreshment?" he asked. "Please," I replied, excited. He led me out of the bustling street into an empty stall where a bare-chested man with only a skimpy cloth wrapped around his waist took the order. Flicking aside the homemade cigarette he was smoking, the shopkeeper picked up a block of some resin and rubbed it against a stone slab until it became a pale green paste. With his index finger, he then scraped the paste into an iron vessel and mixed it with water, shaking it vigorously. Pouring the preparation into a glass, he tossed in some powdered spices, stirred it with a spoon, and slammed it down on a table. I looked to my host, who was wearing a peculiar smile. "Drink this," he said. "It is a natural beverage, non-alcoholic, and very healthy." Not having had food or drink for over a day, I drained the cup. "Would you like another glass?" he inquired. I gratefully accepted a second glass of the green concoction, and then a third and a fourth. Its astringent taste was unrecognizable. "What is it called?" I inquired. Still smiling, he replied, "Bhang." I had never heard this word before. He said goodbye, and I continued to walk down the bustling street. Suddenly, my mind exploded into a state of intoxication. Strange colors, sounds, and countless people spun around me. My body trembled as waves of disorientation washed over me. I was walking right into people. Paranoid, I grew convinced that everyone was staring only at me. How could I have known that bhang is an intoxicating drink derived from the cannabis plant? Thinking it harmless, I had innocently drunk 4 glasses in very short time. Horror overcame me as I realized that I must have unwittingly broken my vow never to take intoxicants. Now I walked alone in this strange, unpleasant state, struggling to reach the end of the road where I might escape the intimidating crowds. The road seemed to never end. I helplessly bumped into humans, cows, hogs, and rickshaws. I reached the end of the road and stared through an intoxicated blur at the massive stone walls that guarded the Red Fort. The immense proportions of what in the 17th century had been the royal palace for the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan were overwhelming. In the front was a large open area where a crowd had gathered. In my delirium, I went to see what was going on. An old man in a white turban was sitting and blowing through the 2 bamboo reeds of an exotic musical instrument. 1.5 feet long, it was made out of dried pumpkin. The snake charmer played a haunting drone, all the while swaying from side to side. Surrounding him were about a dozen hand-woven baskets with lids. A big, bearded man wearing black robes and a red turban opened each basket. The crowd gasped. As the charmer played his hypnotic song, poisonous cobras appeared, raising their fearsome hoods. Forked tongues slithered in and out of their mouths. They swayed from side to side as if dancing to the music. The bearded man then opened other baskets, revealing different varieties of snakes, until finally he lifted out a huge serpent about 12 feet long and 3 inches thick. The crowd stepped back. Before I could blink, he darted toward me and wrapped the monstrous serpent around my hips. Slowly, the serpent crept upward, encircling my waist and chest in its cold, strong coils and locking my arms against my trunk. Its face was only inches from mine, and I could practically feel and smell its breath. Its slitted eyes stared into mine, its forked tongue flitting in and out. My heart pounded and my limbs trembled as the snake tightened its grip. The intoxicating bang was still at a peak. Nightmarish hallucinations, spinning, and paranoia seized me. Meanwhile, a growing crowd of onlookers encircled me, keeping at a safe distance. Suddenly, a man stepped forward and spoke in English. "What is your name, sir? What country are you from? Why are you in the coils of this dangerous snake?" "Please help me," I gasped. My captor tightened its grip as soon as I spoke. It was as if the serpent jealously demanded my total attention. The big bearded man in the red turban came up and stared me in the eyes as if I were a foreign invader. Waving his hands like weapons, he shouted at me, 50 rupees, 50 rupees. Finally, someone in the crowd explained to me in English, "He will only take the snake off if you give him 50 rupees. Straining, I somehow spoke, "But I have no rupees." The onlooker warned, "Then you will remain like this," and nonchalantly departed. My mind went blank, and fear and humiliation rushed through me. Everyone stared at me, a strange foreigner encircled by a snake. Perhaps they thought I was part of the act. A painfully long half-hour passed, with the snake licking its lips and from time to time staring into my eyes. All the while, the old snake charmer played his hypnotic song and the cobras swayed. Thoughts seared my consciousness. It was only my first day in India. Gazing at the teeth of the snake, I wondered, is this the place I risked my life for? What would my mother and father think to see their son so far from home in this condition? With no other recourse, I closed my eyes and prayed. If you have something for me to do in this world, Lord, please help me. As I offered this simple prayer, I felt a small burst of inner peace. Finally, a lone man emerged from the crowd with prayer beads in his wrinkled hands. Sympathetic to me, he bargained with the snake man and donated 10 rupees toward my release. To my relief, the snake man chanted mantras, inviting the serpent into his hands again. The crowd cheered, and the snake released me. Thanking the donor, I quickly fled across the street. There I saw some men sitting on wooden chairs and popping what looked like red candy into their mouths. They asked if I wanted some. Still curious to experience the customs and foods of India, I ate one. My mouth erupted into flames. Drenched in sweat, tears flowing from my eyes, I grabbed for water and drank, but water had the effect of kerosene on fire, increasing the pain. I had just eaten a red-hot chili pepper, the first one I had ever seen or tasted. Again, a crowd of curious onlookers circled around me. I politely thanked the men and went on my way. I thought of the saying, "One man's food is another man's poison." That saying had come alive for me as a burning message. I thought of my studies and observations of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and my explorations of Buddhism and some of the philosophies of India. What is enjoyed by one person creates suffering for another. What we experience of the world is so relative, so conditioned by our subjective experience. In the same way, God, who is absolute, reveals himself to different people in different ways. My mouth still burning, I realized it would be very narrow to think there was only one way to God. As evening approached, the effects of the bhang and the pepper at last subsided. Returning to the Chandni Chowk road, I strolled aimlessly amid the fervor of the bustling bazaar. I had nowhere to go. Among the throngs of pedestrians, a man emerged with a welcoming smile. Thrilled to discover that I had come from so far to understand his traditions, he invited me to dinner at a roadside restaurant. Our outdoor table was just inches from the road. As he told me about his family customs, a white cow, nuzzling its calf, strolled by. So gentle was their demeanor, so graceful their movements, and so innocent their large, beautiful eyes that my heart melted. The mother doted on every movement of her child. While the child was suckling her milk, she licked her offspring tenderly. Lying down just inches from our table, she played with her little calf. In all my life, I had never been so close to a cow, having only seen them in distant pastures as we raced by on the highways. Now I was struck by how these animals shared loving exchanges so similar to those of a human mother and her child. A waiter rushed by and slapped down our plates. I was famished, as all I had eaten all day was some bhang and a chili pepper. Struggling with the serpent, too, had stirred my appetite. I delved into the food. Halfway through the meal, my gracious host asked, "Mr. Richard, would you care for me to explain what all this is?" "Please." Pointing to each item, he described, "This is chawal, rice. This thing that looks like wheat bread is called roti. These vegetables are called sabji. This soup over here is made with lentils, and we call it dal. Here is our condiment, chutney." Then he pointed to some small chunks on the rice. "And this is meat." His last 3 words exploded in my mind. I stared first at the meat chunks and then at the cows. At that moment, the mother cow leaned over to lick my leg. My heart cried. Why should a beautiful life be slaughtered to eat some meat? She loves her child, and this innocent calf loves its mother. Why had I blindly participated in this? Why are we all so blind and deaf to the horror in every slaughterhouse? How has human society become so insensitive to the cruelties inflicted upon these children of God? Although the meat I had been eating was not cow meat, this was the first time I had made the connection between my diet and the suffering of animals. Thinking of the thousands of animals killed every day in America, I lost my composure and dissolved into tears. My poor host didn't know what was happening. Is something wrong, he said. Why are you so disturbed, sir? I could barely speak. Thank you for everything, sir. I stood up and pushed my chair back. Please excuse me, but I'm feeling ill. On my way out, I patted the mother and her calf, and she reciprocated with a slow lick to my hand. Thousands of people crowded the street in the midst of this bustle, and to my delight and surprise, Ramsey and Jeff walked right into me, not noticing me at first. I had not seen them since the day we were separated in Kabul. "Monk, it's you!" exclaimed Jeff. "What a relief to see you. I can't believe it." "Hey, mate," exclaimed Ramsey. "We've been worried about you since that day you were lost." Shaking hands and embracing, we were together again. They brought me to stay with them on the roof of a cheap hotel. As I was dozing off on a bed of twine under a starlit winter sky, the mother and baby cow appeared in my dream. Their gentle, tearful eyes looked helplessly into mine while the blade of a butcher ruthlessly slaughtered them for meat. From my heart burst the biblical commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." I awoke from the nightmare in a state of unbearable nausea and rushed to the toilet for relief. The toilet consisted of a cement hole on the roof, surrounded by crumbling brick walls and a sheet of aluminum for the ceiling. It was pitch dark, and there was no plumbing, except for the bhangis, or street sweepers, who emptied the toilet by shovel. Digging out the waste into a bucket, they would carry it away on their heads. But this toilet was overdue for a cleaning. Stools soaked with urine had piled up above the floor level. With no control over my vomiting, I was trapped inside that latrine. Insects buzzed and bit, and I felt something moving over my feet. All I could do was heave with nausea and shiver in a cold sweat. All the while in my mind's eye, I could see only those two cows gazing at me with their innocent eyes. In that dark rooftop latrine in Old Delhi, I offered another vow before my Lord. I will never again eat meat. This concluded my first day in India. The next morning, Jeff and Ramsey appealed to me. We've been a great traveling team. Let's stay together and tour India. We've passed through a lot together, I said, and bonded as brothers. I can never repay both of you for your kindness and friendship. But I want to travel the Himalayas as a hermit. Please bless me to do so. Jeff spoke first, and kindly. We understand. In fact, we were expecting you to do something like this. He placed his large hand on my small shoulder. May you find what you're seeking. We'll really miss you. A cloud of worry veiled Ramsey's face, as I was like his little brother. His eyes reddened. How are you going to survive that kind of life? But seeing my resolve, he forced a smile and exclaimed in his Australian accent, "It's been a great journey, mate. Cheers." Before we departed, Jeff handed me a small note that read, "It's kind of sad in a way. We are each going his own way in search of himself. I'm sure you will find it."